My name is David Geary. I am the Associate Director of Collections at the Library and Museum of the American Philosophical Society in Philadelphia. Part of my job is to oversee the printed materials and the manuscripts of the Society. And of course, one of those really amazing manuscript collections, as well as print collections, is related to the Lewis and Clark expedition. All right, well, I have a really amazing set of documents to show you right here. One here in the center that I'm in front of is the equivalent of a 19th century Excel sheet from the period. This is William Clark's estimate of the Eastern Indians. The Eastern Indians being west of the Mississippi, but east of the Rocky Mountains. It is a very large graph here, and it has over 20 columns, and then it has 72 rows. So this is very much a product of the Enlightenment, which was getting into the end of the Enlightenment in America in the early 19th century. This was made by William Clark while they were wintering in Fort Mandan, 1804, 1805, and it provides a one-stop shop for all the data they have been gathering, both data that they taken from observations, but also from informants and different people they met along the way. And all of it is put into one sheet. Part of the expedition's mission was to record, organize, and categorize what they were seeing. The United States had just acquired a large empire, and one of Jefferson's goals was to figure out what exactly was going on inside of that land, which still needed to be purchased from the Native Americans and still needed to be settled. But this is the first step of how we're going to understand the West and its potential. What this document is doing is tracing and providing data about Native groups, like I said, in that area between the Mississippi River and the Rocky Mountains. It's very large, covering all sorts of different tribal groups, talking about the size of the group, talking about the languages they spoke, who was friends with who was enemies with whom, and giving a general sense of what they were trading. They're trying to investigate this large land that they have just acquired through the French purchase, and they need to understand how they're going to negotiate it. The expedition was a little controversial in some ways. The Federalists, who were the political enemies of the Jeffersonian Republicans, had a lot of concerns and a lot of skepticism of the value of this Western land that was purchased from the French that needed to still be purchased from the native peoples. And one way to sort of counter those Federalist criticisms was to send back data that could be usable, that would show that we actually have a better understanding of what this land contains, who is living in that land. And this is an example of that sort of move. It's not just a gathering of data for scientific purposes. When Lewis and Clark were overwintering at Fort Mandan in 1804, 1805, they sent back some materials that would give Jefferson and the rest of the country a sense of what they saw, what they found. And this sheet plus another one was sent back with some materials, and this was used as the basis of part of a report that Jefferson gave as president in 1806. So we actually have at the EPS, Thomas Jefferson was the president of the EPS at the same time he was president of the United States while the expedition was happening. He gives this speech to Congress, giving them an update on what's going on. This becomes public knowledge at this point. The copy we have here of the message of the president from 1806 is the copy that Jefferson sent to the EPS in April of 1806. The speech took place in February 1806. You can see it right here. Our former librarian, John Vaughan, said, "For the American Philosophical Society, from the president of the society," which is Thomas Jefferson, a pretty amazing document. And if you come in a little bit here, how different the printed report looks, both in this document and in, say, the modern editions that exist today, is sort of listed because it's very difficult to create this sort of chart in a printed form. So you can see here, they do it they break up each column and then list things down. But this is how you got to see the overview of what Lewis and Clark were gathering at the time. So there were two copies sent. The one copy that was used for this report is now missing, but this copy said most of what that document that went to the Secretary of War in Washington said. And it survived, and it went through Biddle. Biddle was using this to work on the final report, and he gave it to the APS in 1818 at the request of Congress Church, and it's been here ever since. Here's another report, very similar to the Eastern estimate of Indians. This is the Western estimate of Indians from Rocky Mountains westward to the coast. It takes up 6 pages of one of the journals. Both Lewis and Clark were writing in this section to get this data put into this notebook. Much smaller. We talked about 20-something different rows over here, columns over here. There are just several pages listing just very basic information about different tribes. There are tribes here that we know that they did not meet or had representatives that they came across. This would have come from people they had met and various informants they would have met over the course of their trip to the coast. These 2 documents really epitomize the sort of Enlightenment aspect of what Lewis and Clark were doing on their expedition. A lot of what they did in the journals and on these 2 documents is gather data. So they were observing, they were cataloging, they were classifying things. This is all an attempt to sort of create a better sense of knowledge, to make sure people had a better sense of the continent. And these sorts of tools and the sort of just listings that might seem somewhat boring at times in the journals actually have a very, very pivotal part of what they do. This is a scientific expedition as well as a geopolitical expedition, as well as a chance to understand the potential values that this might have for American empire. There are lots of different ways you can imagine this and use this material. This is the American government wanting to understand the different tribal groups and where they were, who they were, and who they were in relationships with, both to understand perhaps if there's any conflict in the future, as well as also to support trade in the future as well. So this sort of encapsulates that sort of Enlightenment move, both positive and negatives.